It's a pleasure to be here with all of the panelists today for this conversation on corporate carbon removals, make, invest, or buy. With me today, starting from my end, is Magnus Drewelies, the CEO of Ceezer, Aaron Neuville, partner at E&Y, and Tomas Thyblad, the Vice President and Head of ESG Solutions at Nasdaq. And the reason why we're all gathered here today is a fantastic paper was released this morning, together with E&Y and Ceezer and the panelists here today, called Creating Value with Green Carbon. So to start off the panel, Magnus, I thought first maybe give us a very brief description of what you do at Ceezer, and will you please take this fabulous 75-page report that was just released today and summarize some of the key takeaways for us?
Sure. Thanks, Martin. So Ceezer is an enterprise platform to screen, purchase, and manage negative emissions. So we essentially help enterprises to build negative emissions portfolios. We do that with customers across the world, including Nasdaq here on stage, but also, for example, Siemens in Germany. And we cover a lot of different industries. And I think what we saw over the past years is the notion that apart from those very big landmark catalytic investments that are being made in CDR, there's a bit of a more quiet transition happening, which is that the heavy industrial players are really starting to look at CDR as both something they might want to do themselves within their value chain, but also a potential area for investment. And I think this we not only see in the heavy industries, we also see it in, obviously, the financial industry now. So what we did is, and I'm trying to be really brief, we looked at real prices. So we took actual market prices, actual forward prices for CDR to look at the potential revenue that CDR can make. We looked at, and this is where Aaron's team came in from EY, we looked at what are the actual cost of implementing CCS across different industries in a way that you would be able to also create CDR and sell that. And we looked at what are the options that come out of it. Like, can you actually make a business out of this? Is that an opportunity for you in your business? Or will you probably be better off with investing in CDR or buying CDR in the market for the long term? And the short answer is there is ample opportunity, but you gotta move fast. I think that's the most important point, is those players that are able to invest in CCS infrastructure early in a way that allows them to also monetize CDR outside of compliance schemes will have two wonderful benefits. The first is very quick monetization of CDR and CCS technologies, but also long-term huge benefit in the compliance markets because they actually are able to reduce their emission share.
Fantastic. And I think when we were prepping for this panel, it's very interesting to think about the different alternatives corporations have to make an impact in carbon removal. They could make it, they could buy it in the form of a credit, they can also invest in it. And so, Aaron, maybe if we could start with you in terms of the make option. And the white paper looked at various carbon capture technologies as well as their implementation across different industries. Could you elaborate on some of the key considerations and challenges companies face when evaluating whether to make their own carbon removal credits using things like BECS or DAC? And how does the economic viability of this option compare across different sectors?
Sure. Thanks, Martin, and
yeah.
Nice to meet you all. Maybe a bit more context, because I arrived here from Berlin, and I'm working especially with our clients in heavy industries in Europe, in Germany, chemical sector, steel, iron, and the question they're facing is beyond regulatory compliance, how can we to some extent create value with this endeavor of decarbonizing our business, decarbonizing our value chains. And one aspect that we look more intensely recently at with our clients is carbon dioxide removals and the possibility to create those and leverage market upside. And the challenge one of the first considerations each industrial needs to look at is there a case to be made in the first place in terms of the quality of emissions, because you're not going to be able to generate CDR certificates based on fossil emissions. So you will have to look at your source, at your carbon source, and see whether you can substitute this with some kind of biogenic source, right? It's very straightforward when you look at a power plant, CHP, CCGT, right? You can switch from natural gas to potentially biomethane, for example. So you have your fossil source. It becomes more challenging if you look at heavy industrial processes like naphtha, if you look at methanol and all these different products in the chemical industry. And not even looking at, I didn't even mention the challenges in the metal and steels industry. So this is what we look at, and the first consideration is usually, is this at all technically and technically feasible and economically viable? And are there options to source, to procure these amounts of biomass? Because this is another challenge that we have. There is a lot of biomass in this world, as you all know, but the challenge that we need to tackle is to kind of like, it's a logistical problem to collect it and to bring it there where it's needed. So these are the aspects that we look at, and I'm happy to dive more into the technologies. We are focusing a lot at bioenergy, carbon capture and storage specs with our clients recently, because it's the most straightforward and most kind of like easy to apply, implement case, but we're also looking at more complicated processes. I mentioned them, methanol, ammonia. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And we're going to come back and maybe talk a little bit more about the BECCS option a little bit later on. That was a very good contextualization of how corporates think about the production aspect of incorporating carbon removal solutions into their value chain and how they do. Maybe, Magnus, if you could speak a little bit to the buy option. And, you know, in reviewing the report, it suggested that CDR prices are expected to decrease over time, but there's also a window of opportunity, and you touched upon this just in your opening remarks, and I'd love for you to maybe explain this concept a little bit more and discuss how companies should approach the buy option for CDR credits in both the short and the long term.
Sure. I mean, as Aaron said, right, I think the CCS and internal decarbonization prices vary heavily by industry, and I think we have some industries where even if you look at the current market prices for CDR, right, which are still very much high compared to where they probably will go with scale, with technological maturity, it will still be cheaper to actually buy CDR from the market, because your own processes will never be to be decarbonized at that cost. And I think that's a reality that we probably have to start looking at as well, that there might be some industries or even just some sub-processes in your organization where you will be better to go to market and buy CDR, right? But the window of opportunity comes from something else. The bad news is under most compliance schemes, and we took the EU ETS as the highest by trading volume, until 2030, 2035, it's probably cheaper for you to buy allowances in the EU ETS. Quite plainly, your CCS costs internally will be way higher. So there's a bit of a risk of waiting out for too long. Now, that time scale might sound long. I think for many chemical companies or heavy industries, it's actually not that long. You might need 5 years to implement, a few years to plan. But what we figured out and what we saw if you lay the pricing data upon the cost data is that if you actually invest early, you have this opportunity right now, or over the next, let's say, 5 to 7 years, where you will produce durable CDR at a price that is actually below the expected market price from other players. So you can start to actually be a producer, which allows you to kind of compensate a bit for the really heavy investment that needs to go into it. And I think it's most fun from a business perspective because there is a real market. This is happening already. I think we look at a few energy companies that have been quite public about their plan to do so, or already starting to implement. But at the same time, it's also a great, I think it's a great opportunity to also reconsider, should we wait for 10 years to do this, or are we actually going to win in the long term by actually investing early?
Yeah, very, very insightful. Tomas, representing here Nasdaq today, would love for you to maybe shift the conversation. We heard a little bit about the make option, the buy option. Now let's talk a little bit about the invest option, which is really interesting from Nasdaq's perspective. You are an investor in Puro Earth, so it would be wonderful to hear a little bit about how Nasdaq approached that decision, but also as an investor and a provider of ESG solutions, how do you see the role of financial markets evolving and supporting and shaping the CDR market?
Well, thanks for having me here. As you said, we are investing. We are also buying CDRs for ourselves. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad. But as you said, we have invested in the carbon credit platform Pure Earth. Joe was here on the panel just a few minutes ago. And I think the starting point is that we have, when we provide our ESG solutions and our decarbonization solutions for our corporates, that is the very center of what we want to do. We want to support our listed corporates on their decarbonization journey. Everything from ESG advisory to workflow tools to report and to measure, etc. And then we also realize that, okay, they will also have the residual emissions. So let's move into that segment. And we scanned the market and did some intel and realized that the CDR, for durable CDRs, that is where we want to be. There's a great value in other types of credits as well, but that's where we, from a Nasdaq perspective, want to be and be able to help out and scale that market. It's easier to verify, it's easier to measure, it's another durability. So that's where we wanted to be. So what we have done is to help Puro to scale and to grow and put the Nasdaq machinery on top of that. Mm-hmm. We have utilized our technology in order to have a robust and good registry, because that's very much the fundamental for this. And what we try now is to build the actual, the starting point for us is the credibility and the trust in the actual asset. If that is not there, the market will never scale. So that's where we have done, and I think we are on a very good way on that journey.
And just following up on that, what are some of the things about the Nasdaq infrastructure that you found has been particularly useful to the Puro investment?
I think it's probably three things. One is, of course, technology. As I said, we implemented our own technology. We power like 130 marketplaces around the world with Nasdaq technology, so that is quite natural for us to utilize that. Secondly, I think the network of financial intermediaries as well. I strongly believe that this market, the CDR market, especially I think especially the CDR market, it's so big transactions, it's so high value, so you need to more or less, for a long time, I think, treat them almost like a bond issuance. It's big value, it's one big issuer, and you need to find a number of corporates to take that issue, so to say. And that's why I think where financial intermediaries, for instance, and other intermediaries will come into play. And we have a fantastic network of that.
That's great. You know, Magnus and Aaron, when you're dealing with corporations, there's different parts of the corporate that have to get their arms around this important decision. Sometimes you're talking to sustainability folks that are purchasing credits. Sometimes you're talking to treasury and finance that's making big investment decisions. Could you each share a little bit about how you interact with the corporate side of this important opportunity and navigate the actual customer, in this case, the corporate? I'd love to hear both your perspectives on getting real advice into the corporate sector.
Sure, I can take that. Well, usually when we interact with our clients on questions around decarbonizing their business or looking at ways to create value with new production lines, it's in context of a larger strategic discussion that we have with them around their decarbonization journey. And that involves the departments that you just mentioned, sustainability, finance, and so on and so forth. But in general, we differentiate between clients that are very eager to, very mature in their kind of like a thought process in becoming green, if I may put it like that. And they're just looking at ways how to implement it at minimum cost and maximum impact, right? So they're very convicted in what they want to do. And then there are others, they are to some extent doing minimum compliance kind of thing, right? They are looking at the market, they look where it develops, there are regulatory boundaries they have to oblige to, but they will basically just do what is necessary. And that usually means incurring the cost of our EU ETS compliance certificates, right? And they just pay it until it might not be viable anymore. And this is exactly what Magnus just mentioned. So how do we interact with them? Well, we show them what the avenues are when we're looking into the future, because especially in a European context, EU ETS prices will increase inevitably. It's mandated by the EU European Commission. So eventually it will become economically very punitive to incur these costs. So there needs to be some kind of angle to attach this and to attack this. And some, as you may be very well aware, some of the large industrial producers right now in Germany, there is a huge public discussion about them moving their production sites outside of Germany, outside of the EU, because they are seeing that they will inevitably face these costs. That's a point where we may be able, in some cases, offer a different kind of vantage point when we come in and look at, well, isn't there a way to become green and create value? And the issue, well, we have limited time, but diving into the technicalities is inevitable, even with the senior executives, in order to understand the intricacies of such a setup. And what we usually do is then we actually go through the whole business case and evaluate it with them, look at the market potentials, and in some cases it's very attractive, but it requires an ecosystem.
And your perspective on integrating and interacting with different departments and getting them to focus on one of these pathways, would love to hear from you.
Sure. And just to take up your point, Thomas, I think it very much, I think, is a very complex decision. I don't think building a CDR portfolio or deciding how to invest in CDR is an easy thing that has been done a lot of times, right? It's often the first time. It's a lot of first movers currently in the market. So we basically look at, I think, two things. The first is making sure both the sustainability team, but then also finance, procurement, has understood what does the market look like today. And I think it's important to point out that relatively permanent CDR, you probably can look between like $100 and $900 per ton currently in the market. So that's an information that for many teams is kind of new. So they have to understand, why is there a difference in price? What does that mean? How is it related to quality in the CDR space? And the second point, more to your point, Aaron, is what is the time scale of this? So if I invest in it now, will I be able to actually gain something out of it later? I think there's a huge value in things like long-term offtake agreements, which are not just great for the market, but honestly also great to secure supply, to secure volume. But this is something that you need to, I think, put data behind. So we try to really work with all the data that we have as Ceezer, obviously, to make the difference in quality understood, but also use our information on both volumes and prices to make it very tangible. Like, what are we missing out on? Like, what's the investment we need to do in 2 years if the market prices develop as we can see them? And I think then it also is almost like it helps to translate this decision a bit from a very new topic to something that companies have done forever, which is just taking an investment decision ultimately. And
for all the panelists to answer, what has been some of the more effective arguments you have seen work with corporates when it comes to the cost side of this? Because you spoke very eloquently about the window of opportunity, but as we heard from the last panel, there's still some expensive prices. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the, and there are corporates in the audience here today, could you talk a little bit about the cost barricade and what you find has been most effective through either the make, invest, or buy option?
If I start, I think in terms of the buy option, what's important is that I don't think anyone expects the corporates to start to offset and to neutralize the full remaining emissions here and now. What we are asking, so to say, and what the corporate should do is start to build a CDR portfolio from a very small, low volume. And it doesn't exist that much. So it needs to send the signal and start to build the portfolio so you have sufficient amount for your residual emissions. I think that is the main aim. And if we can mobilize and have mechanically corporates to do that, but not just the tier one companies, so to say, like the Microsofts and the others, which have the muscles and also the big sustainability departments. If we can get a broader range, but mobilize more action in that, that would be fantastic. And I think it's also part of a robust and credible path to net zero for a company.
Maybe to add on that point, because this is exactly,
Yeah.
I think, what we do with most clients, right? It's like we start really small on the permanent CDR sphere, and there's both the share of CDR that you have in your portfolio if you also still purchase other credits, for example, but it's great to start with a small thing, and that's what I meant a bit by the more silent transition in a way, right? That's the exciting bit, I think. It's maybe less the headlines, it's more that a lot of industry players are starting bit by bit to actually implement this, which is way more powerful in the long term to have the right volume in place. The second piece, I think, is also how you build your portfolio. There's ranges of prices, right? I think you have to meet the buyers where they are. So if you look at the current macro environment, not every industry might be super willing to like overspend, right? So you need to figure out, is there a way that we can start small, start at a cost point that is realistic for you, that you can get a decision on, but to start building that muscle and build kind of the experience with this and get it through the board.
And
Please
just to add, I think it's quite interesting because now we've talked about the compliance market and what's driving that, and we talked about the more voluntary commitments and what's driving that. And I think that is these two worlds going to live in parallel for quite some time. And in Europe, for instance, it's probably going to be more compliance-driven. Parts of US going to be that, but it's going to be many regions around the world that does not have the same compliance-driven demand at all. That's going to take a long time. So we need to find a structure that actually can handle both these type of markets in parallel and also a lot of good connectivity between them.
Yeah. Would you like to add anything, Aaron?
Just a short note. We recently, this is not part of this study that we're publishing today, but directly related, we recently looked at our transactions that we, corporate transactions that we supported over the past 10 years. And we looked at the betas, and we looked at whether there could be inferred a so-called green premium in the investments and the transactions. And we see early indications that this is becoming more and more true. But it's very subtle, and it's a I would say not the majority of transactions where we look at, but going forward, we expect that this trend will increase. And this is, when you're asking me, what do we tell our clients in terms of cost? Why should we incur these today? Simply because we can now see empirically that company value increases when you're engaged in these kind of green investments.
Well, it's been absolutely illuminating to hear the three of you talk about this important topic. The QR code is up there on the screen, so I really do hope that all of you take the opportunity to download the report. We have just about a minute left, and I'll leave any final remarks to the three of you for the benefit of the audience.
I mean, I think I'm going to end like I started. I think there's so much opportunity in the process industries. I think it's kind of underestimated at this point. So I really encourage, I think, especially corporates in that space, to look at the opportunities that are out there and be careful to not miss the boat. I think it's really, there's like a crucial next 5 years, I think, where you will decide what you're going to do, and this will decide where you stand on potential costs of carbon in your organization for a very long time.
It's not going to be easy. It's just very, very, very tricky to come up with value-creating business models in heavy industries because the world market is as it is. It's based on fossils and is very competitive and small margins. So this takes effort. And what I can just encourage each and every one of us is to put in the effort because it's worthwhile for your company valuation and then also at large for our society.
I would like to say that quite often we look at the CDRs and like carbon credits outside your value chain mitigation, beyond value chain mitigation. To me, CDRs is in the value chain. I mean, to be net zero, a company operating in a net zero context, you need to start to purchase that. That's going to be a natural part of your supplier range of suppliers.
Well, fantastic. We only managed to go 20 seconds over. So please join me in a warm round of applause for our panelists. And
Thank you.
They will be around in the area outside if you'd like to grab them for any conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.